Riking tensions boil over as Rebecca fiercely confronts Joni Lamb about the Doug Weiss controversy. In a shocking outburst, Rebecca doesn't hold back, exposing the cracks in the Daystar leadership and the deep divisions within the Lamb family. What Rebecca reveals will leave you stunned and questioning everything you thought you knew about the Lambs and their control over Daystar. Stay tuned for this explosive confrontation that could change everything. Rebecca Lamb, the youngest daughter of Joni and Marcus Lamb, had always been known for her outspoken nature. She was never afraid to voice her opinion, especially when it came to matters concerning her family. So, when her mother, Joni, began a relationship with Dr. Doug Weiss shortly after the passing of Marcus in 2021, Rebecca didn't hesitate to express her concerns. To Rebecca, the speed of the relationship felt unsettling. Her mother had just lost her husband, a man who had been the heart and soul of Daystar television network. Marcus's death left a massive void, both in the Lamb family and within the Christian media world. Rebecca believed that her mother needed time to grieve, heal, and process the loss of Marcus before jumping into another relationship. She didn't just feel uncomfortable about Doug as a person, but about the message the relationship sent to their followers. For Rebecca, the Lamb family had always been about loyalty, faith, and commitment. She felt that this quick transition into a new relationship undermined those core values. Rebecca's outspoken nature led her to confront her mother directly. She wasn't going to silently watch her family's legacy unfold in a way that didn't sit right with her. She voiced her concerns in conversations with Joni, expressing how she felt that the relationship with Doug was moving too quickly and was potentially damaging to the family dynamic. For Rebecca, it wasn't just a personal matter. It was about the image of the Lamb family and Daystar as a ministry. As a public figure, her mother's decisions were no longer just her own. They affected the ministry, their followers, and the public's perception of their family. Rebecca's concerns weren't just about a mother dating again after the loss of her husband. It was about the legacy that Marcus and Joni had built together. How could their family uphold the values of faithfulness and devotion if Joni was moving on so swiftly? Rebecca's stance wasn't received well by everyone. While she spoke out of love and concern for her family, her words started to create a rift. Joni, who had been at the center of Daystar and their family's public life, was determined to move forward, and she didn't see eye to eye with Rebecca's perspective. The more Rebecca spoke up, the more Joni seemed focused on her relationship with Doug. This created a growing tension between them, and soon it wasn't just about Doug anymore. It became a question of trust, communication, and the values that had once united their family. Rebecca's concerns were met with resistance from her mother, who dismissed them as misunderstandings or personal discomfort. The more Rebecca tried to make her mother see the bigger picture, the further she felt from her. What began as a conversation between mother and daughter soon escalated into a painful conflict. Rebecca was trying to protect the family's integrity and the legacy her parents had worked so hard to build, but in doing so, she found herself increasingly isolated, both emotionally and within the family. The tension between Rebecca Lamb and her mother Joni reached a boiling point in the months following Marcus Lamb's death. For years, the Lamb family had been seen as a close-knit unit, tightly bound together by faith, love, and a shared mission through their work at Daystar. But as soon as Joni began her relationship with Doug Weiss, everything started to shift. Rebecca, the youngest of the Lamb children, had always been the one to speak her mind. She was never shy about voicing her opinions, especially when it came to matters that impacted her family. And when it came to her mother's new relationship, Rebecca didn't hold back. From the start, Rebecca was uncomfortable with the speed at which the relationship progressed. Her father had only passed away months before, and the thought of her mother moving on so quickly was unsettling to her. She didn't believe that it was healthy for Joni to rush into another relationship so soon after the loss of Marcus. But it wasn't just about her discomfort with the situation. It was about the values she had grown up with. The Lamb family had always been a symbol of faithfulness, integrity, and commitment, not just in their personal lives, but in their ministry as well. To Rebecca, this new relationship threatened to undo everything they had worked for. Joni, however, was determined to move forward. She had spent her life building Daystar alongside Marcus, and now, with his sudden passing, she was taking the lead of the ministry. Joni saw her relationship with Doug as part of that progression, something that helped her heal and continue the work she had started with Marcus. In her eyes, there was nothing wrong with moving on, especially when she found someone who was supportive and shared her faith. She believed that Doug was the right person for her, and she wasn't going to let anyone, including Rebecca, tell her otherwise. But Rebecca didn't see things that way. She felt that her mother's actions were compromising the values they had always preached, and as a result, she began to speak out more. Rebecca confronted Joni on several occasions, telling her how she felt about the relationship and its implications. She wasn't just worried about the personal side of things, she was deeply concerned about how this would affect their ministry and their reputation. Rebecca was worried about how Daystar would be viewed if they continued down this path. It wasn't just about family dynamics, it was about the larger Christian community that had supported them for years. At first, Rebecca's concerns were met with resistance. Joni wasn't interested in hearing what her daughter had to say. She saw Rebecca's objections as a sign of her own personal discomfort rather than a legitimate issue with the relationship. To Joni, moving forward with Doug was a personal decision, one that had nothing to do with the larger ministry. But to Rebecca, it felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just that Joni was moving on, it was that she was doing so in a way that felt rushed and reckless. Rebecca's voice became increasingly isolated as the weeks went by. Joni, who had always been a strong leader, was now asserting her power in ways that made Rebecca feel alienated. The tension between the two women grew more palpable with each passing day. What began as a disagreement over a personal relationship soon turned into a full-blown conflict that affected their relationship on every level. Rebecca began to feel like her concerns were being dismissed, and the more she tried to voice them, the more Joni seemed determined to shut her down. It wasn't just about Doug, it was about the fact that Rebecca felt like her voice was being ignored in a family where everyone had once worked together as a team. As the months wore on, the tension between mother and daughter reached its peak. Rebecca, who had always been close to her mother, felt like she was being pushed away. Joni's growing bond with Doug seemed to take precedence over everything else, and Rebecca was left standing on the sidelines. The more Rebecca tried to speak out, the more Joni withdrew, until they were both in an emotional standoff. Rebecca felt betrayed, not just by her mother but by the entire situation. She couldn't understand how her mother could make such a drastic decision without consulting the rest of the family, especially when so much was at stake. Behind the scenes, the rest of the Lamb family was also feeling the strain. Rebecca wasn't the only one who had concerns about the relationship. Jonathan Lamb, Joni and Marcus's son, was also troubled by his mother's decision to marry Doug. But where Rebecca felt isolated in her views, Jonathan took a more subdued approach, quietly distancing himself from the situation. The rift between mother and daughter was now mirrored by a growing divide within the family. The once unified Lamb family was now fractured, each member taking sides and struggling to find their place in a ministry that was undergoing a transformation they didn't fully understand. To make matters worse, Joni's actions were being closely scrutinized by the public. As the head of Daystar, Joni had always been a public figure, and her decisions affected not just her family, but millions of viewers around the world. Her marriage to Doug was no exception. People in the Christian community were watching closely, and many were unsure how to feel about the sudden shift in her personal life. Some supported her, believing that she had the right to move on and find happiness after Marcus's death. But others saw it as a betrayal of the values they had once preached, a sign that Joni was putting her personal desires ahead of the ministry's mission. For Rebecca, the tension reached a breaking point. She could no longer stay silent about what she felt was happening to her family and the ministry they had built. Her relationship with Joni became strained to the point where they stopped speaking altogether. Rebecca, who had once been her mother's confidant, now felt like a stranger to her. The emotional distance between them was palpable, and the more Rebecca tried to stand her ground, the more Joni seemed determined to silence her. The family, once so close-knit and united, was now unraveling at the seams, and no one knew how to fix it. The escalation of tension in the Lamb family wasn't just personal. It had far-reaching implications for Daystar. The ministry, which had once been a beacon of hope and faith for millions, was now caught in the middle of a family drama that was being played out in the public eye. Supporters of Daystar were left questioning what was happening behind the scenes, unsure whether the ministry they had trusted for years was still the same. For Rebecca, it wasn't just about her family. It was about protecting the legacy of her father and the values they had all worked so hard to build. The fallout from this escalating conflict wasn't just emotional. It had real consequences for Daystar's future. Viewership began to decline as the public grappled with the growing drama within the Lamb family. Donations slowed, and the future of the ministry looked uncertain. The question on everyone's mind was whether Daystar could survive the fallout from this very public family rift. The story of Rebecca and Joni Lamb's growing tension is one of heartbreak, betrayal, and the painful reality of leadership in the public eye. It's a story of how personal struggles and family dynamics can affect the very foundations of a ministry built on faith and trust. As the Lamb family continues to deal with the fallout, the world watches to see what happens next. Will they reconcile and heal from the wounds that have been exposed, or will the tension continue to fracture the family and the ministry? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: the Lamb family will never be the same. The silence from Rebecca Lamb was deafening. For someone who had always been outspoken, always willing to voice her opinions, especially when it came to matters of family, it was as if she had suddenly disappeared from the conversation entirely. After months of raising her concerns about her mother, Joni Lamb, and her controversial relationship with Doug Weiss, Rebecca's voice was gone. It was a silence that left many wondering what had happened. Why had Rebecca, who had once been so vocal about her objections to Joni's actions, suddenly stopped speaking out? The speculation started almost immediately. Supporters and critics alike began to ask questions. Had Rebecca changed her mind about her mother's relationship? Had she finally come to accept the situation? Or was something else at play? For months, Rebecca had been the loudest critic of Joni's decision to marry Doug. Just months after Marcus Lamb's passing, her concerns had been about the speed of the relationship, the timing, and the impact it would have on the family and the ministry they had built together. But now, there was nothing. No social media posts, no public statements, not even a whisper in the media. It was as though Rebecca had been erased from the conversation. This sudden silence was more than just odd. It was troubling. It left people wondering what had happened behind closed doors. Some speculated that Rebecca had come to terms with her mother's decisions. After all, it was hard to ignore the bond that Joni and Doug shared, especially after they married. Others, however, believed that the silence was forced. They suggested that Rebecca had been pressured into silence, perhaps by her mother or other influential figures within the family. The tension between Rebecca and Joni had already been building for months. Rebecca had openly criticized her mother for rushing into a new relationship so soon after Marcus's death. But Joni, who was trying to navigate her grief and step into a leadership role, was determined to move forward with her life. As her relationship with Doug progressed, Joni became more defensive, and her dismissive response to Rebecca's concerns only added fuel to the fire. What made the silence even more puzzling was that Rebecca had never been one to back down. She had always been the type of person who spoke her mind, even when it meant clashing with those around her. But now, she seemed to have disappeared from the conversation entirely. The silence spoke volumes. It was as though Rebecca had been silenced, her voice drowned out by the growing tension in her family. For those who had watched Rebecca's outspoken criticism of Joni's relationship, her sudden quietness was both jarring and unsettling. In the absence of any public statements from Rebecca, the rumors began to swirl. Some insiders claim that Rebecca had been forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, by Joni. An NDA is a legal document that prevents someone from discussing certain matters publicly. The idea that Rebecca might have been legally bound to stay silent about the ongoing family drama sent shockwaves through the community. If true, this would mean that Rebecca was not free to speak her mind, despite her previously vocal opposition to the relationship. This new development made the situation even more complicated. Was Rebecca truly okay with what was happening? Or was she simply being silenced by legal means? The NDA rumors gained traction, especially when Jonathan Lamb, Rebecca's brother, began to hint at the situation in private conversations. While Jonathan had also been sidelined by his mother's decisions, he seemed to have more room to speak out. He was, after all, the son of Joni and Marcus Lamb, and his position within the family gave him a certain level of influence. However, Rebecca was in a different position. As the youngest child, she had always been more outspoken, but now it seemed as if her words had been taken away from her. The silence from Rebecca only fueled the growing speculation about what was really happening behind closed doors. Some believed that Rebecca had been bought off, paid to keep quiet in exchange for some form of compensation. Others thought that Joni had simply worn her daughter down, forcing her to accept the situation and keep her opinions to herself. Whatever the case, the silence created a void, a space filled with doubt, rumors, and suspicion. Meanwhile, Joni continued to press forward with her marriage to Doug Weiss, and her influence within Daystar grew. She had taken control of the ministry in the wake of Marcus's death, but her leadership was now being questioned. The more Joni tried to move forward, the more Rebecca's silence seemed to become a symbol of the fractured family dynamics. The Lamb family, once seen as a strong and united force in Christian media, was now splintering under the weight of personal and professional struggles. The public was watching closely, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The emotional toll on Rebecca was undoubtedly significant. She had spent much of her life in the public eye, part of a family that had become synonymous with Daystar and its message of faith. To go from being the outspoken critic of Johnny's relationship to being completely silent was a difficult transition. It wasn't just about her mother's marriage. It was about everything the family had built together. Rebecca had grown up in a ministry that preached unity, love, and faithfulness. And now she was faced with the painful reality that those values were being tested in ways she never imagined. At the same time, the silence allowed the rumors to grow. Without Rebecca's voice in the conversation, others began to speculate about her motivations. Some saw her silence as a sign of resignation, while others saw it as a sign of betrayal. The family's internal struggles had spilled into the public eye, and the absence of Rebecca's perspective only deepened the sense of mystery surrounding the situation. The longer Rebecca remained silent, the more the tension built. People began to ask questions about what had really happened behind the scenes. Was Rebecca's silence a sign of acceptance, or was it a response to pressure? Was she genuinely okay with her mother's relationship with Doug, or was she simply unable to speak out? The silence became its own story, one that people couldn't stop speculating about. In the end, the silence left a lasting impact on the Lamb family and Daystar. It forced the public to confront the complexities of family dynamics, leadership, and personal struggles. It reminded everyone that no matter how strong a family or ministry may appear, there are always hidden challenges beneath the surface. And while Rebecca's silence may have been a personal decision, it had far-reaching consequences for the legacy of the Lamb family and the future of Daystar. The question now is whether Rebecca will ever find her voice again, and if she does, what that will mean for the future of the family and the ministry they built. The atmosphere in the Lamb family had already been tense following the sudden death of Marcus Lamb in 2021, and the situation only worsened as Joni Lamb's quick remarriage to Doug Weiss sparked a flurry of controversy. But what no one expected was the legal pressure that Rebecca Lamb found herself under. Pressure that would force her into silence. The source of this silence wasn't just personal discomfort or the family's typical issues. It was a legally binding non-disclosure agreement, NDA, that Rebecca had been made to sign. The idea of a non-disclosure agreement within a family, especially one as public and influential as the Lambs, was shocking in itself. NDAs are often used in business settings to protect sensitive information, but to apply one to a personal family matter seemed like a step too far. Yet as whispers of the NDA grew louder, it became clear that Rebecca's silence wasn't a mere coincidence or a personal choice. It was the result of legal constraints. The NDA had effectively shut her down, stopping her from speaking out publicly about the tensions within the Lamb family and the growing concern about Daystar's future under Joni and Doug's leadership. This turn of events raised serious questions, both within the Lamb family and among their followers. For years, Rebecca had been an outspoken member of the family. She had never hesitated to voice her concerns, particularly when it came to the rapid pace of Johnny's relationship with Doug. She had publicly expressed her worries about the timing of the relationship, especially so soon after Marcus's death. As a member of the Lamb family, her words carried weight. She wasn't just a daughter in the shadows, she was a key part of the family and the ministry's future. Her sudden silence, therefore, felt like a betrayal of her usual boldness. The NDA, which was allegedly enforced by Joni, had come as a shock to many insiders. If true, the signing of such a document spoke to the deepening divisions within the family and the ever-growing control Joni had over Daystar's future. What made the NDA even more troubling was the suggestion that Rebecca had been forced to sign it, possibly as a condition for her continued involvement with the ministry. It wasn't just a matter of personal disagreement between mother and daughter. There were now legal forces at play, influencing the dynamics of the family and potentially the future of Daystar itself. Rebecca had made no secret of her discomfort with the direction Joni and Doug were taking. From her concerns about Doug's swift rise to prominence within the ministry to the public fallout from the marriage, Rebecca had been one of the most vocal critics of her mother's decisions. But after the NDA was allegedly signed, she went completely silent. Gone were the social media posts, the interviews, the public statements that had once been her trademark. Instead, Rebecca faded from the public eye, and this silence raised immediate suspicion. As news of the NDA spread, it became clear that Rebecca was now bound by legal obligations to remain silent about the growing crisis within the Lamb family. The implications of this were huge. An NDA typically means that the person signing it is prohibited from discussing certain matters, often in exchange for compensation or some sort of protection. In this case, Rebecca's silence seemed to come at the cost of her ability to speak freely about what was happening within her own family. This was no longer just a matter of family disagreements or leadership struggles. It was a legal issue that directly affected the transparency and accountability of the Lamb family and Daystar.